Hello sports fans, welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going from a Week 5 UFL predictions. So last week in Week 4, I had an okay week as I went 2-2, and that brings my record on the season to 10-6. But kicking things off this week with the game we have on Friday night, that being the Defenders at the Stallions. And we'll be having a live watch party for this game starting about 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, so hope to see you guys there. But this is a very interesting game, and this is actually my championship game pick in the preseason, although so far, only one team has really looked like a title contender. As the Defenders, they're 3-1, and the Stallions, they're 1-3. And this is kind of a must-win game for the Stallions, because they're currently last in the UFL, sitting at 1-3, and if they start 1-4, that is going to be really hard for them to come back and try to make the playoffs. Especially with the way things have played out so far, they don't have some of the tiebreakers. So, this is kind of a must-win game for the Stallions. And even if they don't win, which they kind of need to, they need to be a lot better than they were last week. Because last week they were terrible, and they lost 16-0. Now, they did make some big moves this week, as they went out and they traded away quarterback Matt Corral, and they traded him to the Storm for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And I'm excited to see what DTR can do with the Stallions offense. Because the Stallions offense has been terrible so far. It's actually the worst scoring offense in the UFL through the first 4 weeks. Now, I definitely think he's going to help this offense, especially running the ball, because the Stallions' run game is not very good, and he obviously adds a whole other element with what he can do as a runner. And I definitely think he could help this pass game, but he's obviously going to need to throw the ball effectively, and we haven't exactly seen him be a super consistent passer, but I definitely think he's got the potential to do that. But while I am excited about Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting for the Stallions, he does get a pretty tough matchup, because the Defenders' defense, they've been great so far, as they're second in the league, allowing just 17.8 points a game, and they've got the league's top pass defense. Now, on the other side, the offense for the Defenders, they've been great. They're leading the UFL with 31.8 points per game, and they've also got the number 1 rushing offense with 144 rush yards per game. Now, the Stallions' defense, they have been pretty good, but I do worry about them against the run this week, for a couple reasons. One, because they're facing an elite rushing offense, but two, because they lost 2 really important run defenders this week, as they traded away Amani Bledsoe in the trade to get DTR, and they also released Perry and Winfrey for a reason that is pretty unknown, which is kind of a surprising move considering he's a good player. But I really worry about the Stallions' ability to stop the run in this game. But as far as this game goes, this has potential to be a really good game. I mean, I think these might be the 2 most talented teams in the UFL, but so far only one team has played like an actual good team, and I'm going to take them to get the win. So I've got the Defenders with the win. I just trust their ability to run the ball, especially against a run defense that's got some questions right now. And even though the Stallions' offense is not lack talent, I just want to see DTR and the offense play well before I'm going to pick them to beat one of the better teams in the UFL. So I'm going to take the Defenders to get the win their 4th game in a row, and beat the Stallions by a score of 26-19. Moving to the game on Saturday, that is the Storm hosting the Battlehawks. And this is another game that's pretty interesting, as we've got the undefeated Storm as they're 4-0 against the Battlehawks who are 2-2. And this is also the first time Storm head coach and former Battlehawks coach Anthony Becht is facing his former team. So it should be pretty interesting. Now, the Battlehawks, they're a lot like the Stallions. They've been great defensively, but the offense has been pretty bad. And the Battlehawks, a lot like the Stallions, went out and made a trade at quarterback, as they traded for Luis Perez, and I think that's a good move. And I've mentioned that in my Power Rankings video, that I think that's something they should do, and they went out and they did that. Now, the interesting thing is they are going to stick with Harrison Frost for this game. Now, I don't really think that makes much sense, because you know Luis Perez is a good quarterback, and Harrison Frost went 6 for 21 last week. So, they're going to give him another chance, which might not be the worst idea, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he gets benched at some point in this game, because the way they put it, it does seem like Luis Perez could see some playing time. Now, this Battlehawks offense, they have not been great, and I could see them struggling once again, because the Storm defense, they shut out the Stallions last week, and they're actually the best scoring defense in the UFL. Although their pass defense actually isn't that great, as they're tied for worst in the league, allowing 222 passing yards per game. Now, on the other side, the offense for the Storm, they've been good, although I've never really been super impressed with them, but they've always seemingly done enough to get the win. But on the season, they're scoring 21.8 points per game, but they get a very big test against an elite Battlehawks defense. But this is another game that I think is going to be quite good. I think this game could go either way, and if this game was in St. Louis, I would probably take the Battlehawks just because they don't lose at home. But it's in Orlando. I'm going to take the Storm to get the win, remain undefeated. Anthony Becht gets the win against his former team, and I've got the Storm with the win by a score of 20-16. And then moving to the couple games we have on Sunday, the first one is the Aviators at the Gamblers. So the Aviators, they're 1-3, and they beat the Renegades last week for their first win of the season, and now they're trying to make it 2-0, and then it'll face the Gamblers, who are quite bad, as they're just 1-3. And I think this should be a somewhat interesting game. Now, the offense for the Aviators, they looked great last week. They scored 28 points, and they were dominant on the ground. And I think this offense should continue to play pretty well, because last week they really found their offensive identity in running the football, and then they'll face a Gamblers defense that is not great against the run. Now, their numbers against the run actually aren't terrible, as they're allowing under 100 rushing yards a game, but I still don't really think this run defense is that good. They've just played a couple of teams who just cannot run the ball, and the one time they played a team that's got a good rush offense, the Defenders, they allowed 164 rushing yards. So, even though their numbers aren't terrible, I do still think the Aviators will be able to run the ball effectively, because I don't think this run defense is that great. And defense as a whole is actually allowing the most points per game through the first 4 games. Now, on the other side, the offense for the Gamblers, they're also not great, as they're second worst, scoring just 17 points per game, and they're still banged up at the quarterback spot. Although Nolan Henderson and Hunter Deckers are both trending in the right direction, and it seems like one of them could be able to play, we just don't know because they haven't announced a starting quarterback for this week's game. But the Gamblers, like the Aviators, their offense I think is better when they run the football, because they've got a pretty good run game, and they're rushing for 124 yards per game, which is actually 3rd in the league. And I think they could also run the ball effectively, because this is an Aviators defense that absolutely cannot stop the run. As last week they allowed nearly 8 yards a carry, I believe, and they've got the league's worst rush defense, allowing over 140 rush yards per game. But I think this is going to be a game where both these teams will run the ball effectively, both teams will score some points, and I think this game could go either way. Now, neither team is great, as they're 1-3, but I do think the Aviators are the better team. I do think they get their second win in a row. They've run the ball more effectively, just the better overall team, and I've got the Aviators getting their second win in a row, improving to 2-3 on the year, and they beat the Gamblers by a score of 26-20. And our final game here in Week 5, we've got the Kings at the Renegades. So the Kings, they got their first win of the season last week, as they beat the Gamblers in overtime, and the Renegades, they lost their first game of the season last week, losing to the Aviators. And this is another game that there's some interesting storylines. And again, it's at quarterback, because the Kings, they traded away Jason Bean as they traded him to the Defenders, and they're now starting their backup quarterback, Chandler Rogers. And I do not like this move for the Kings. I really like Jason Bean. He wasn't always the most consistent and had some accuracy issues when throwing underneath, but I definitely think he was their best option at quarterback. Now, I'm not saying Chandler Rogers is terrible, but when he played in Week 2, he didn't look too great, and I definitely think Bean was their best option. So, trading him away doesn't make much sense. But Chandler Rogers, obviously there's always the chance that he's really good, and he gets to make his first start of the year, and he makes his first start against a Renegades defense that is actually pretty solid, as they're 3rd in the league, allowing 20.8 points per game. Although this is a Renegades defense that did not play very well last week, as they allowed a season-high 28 points, mostly because they could not stop the run. Although, they don't really have to worry about stopping the run this week, because this Kings rush offense is one of the worst rushing offenses I've ever seen, because they cannot run the ball. Now, on the flip side, the offense for the Renegades, they also did not play that well last week, as they scored just 14 points, and Austin Reed did not have his best game. And then they'll face a Kings defense that has actually been pretty solid so far, allowing 21.2 points per game, and the pass defense also about league average. But this is another game that I think could go either way. I think the Kings could continue their momentum from last week and get another win, and I think we could see the Renegades continue to lose, but I'm going to take the Renegades to get back on track. I just trust their offense to bounce back, and I just don't love what the Kings have offensively after trading away Jason Bean, especially not having a good run game. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on a new quarterback against a pretty good defense, and I just don't love that, especially when you're going to have to keep up with an offense that I think should have a bounce-back game. So I'm going to take the Renegades to get the win, get back on track, and beat the Kings by a score of 27-13. But those are my Week 5 UFL predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. Be sure to check out the post tab on my channel, where you guys can vote on who you think will win this week's games. But thank you guys for watching. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you next video.